Hello there. My name is Elizabeth, and if you're watching this, maybe you've ever felt invisible. Like the world has decided your best years are behind you and you're just supposed to sit quietly in a corner. Well, today I want to tell you a story. It's about a key, a garage, and the day I discovered that my late husband's final gift to me wasn't what anyone thought it was. It was a secret he kept for 7 years, a test of character he set for our own son, and the key to unlocking a version of myself I had long forgotten. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you believe in the power of a second act, I'd be so honored if you'd subscribe and join me for this. I think it might just change the way you see things. My 68th birthday began not with cake and well wishes, but with me standing in the oak-paneled office of our family attorney, Mr. Henderson. The scent of old books and lemon polish hung in the air, a smell I would forever associate with loss. I was wearing the same simple black dress I'd buried my husband, Arthur, in just 4 weeks prior. The wool felt scratchy against my skin, a constant unpleasant reminder of the gaping hole he had left in my life. Our son David stood beside me. At 38, he was the picture of success, his suit costing more than my first car, his posture radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His hand on my arm felt less like a comfort and more like a restraint. Mr. Henderson, who had shared Christmas dinners with us for 20 years, avoided my gaze. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Before we begin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to assure you both that Arthur's will is legally sound and reflects his very specific, carefully considered wishes." A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Why did that sound like a warning? The first part of the will was straightforward. Charitable donations, small bequests to old friends. Then came the part that would cleave my life in two. "To my son, David," Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly, "I leave the primary residence at 214 Maple Street along with all its contents and the entirety of my publicly held investment portfolio and liquid assets." I felt the air leave my lungs in a soft rush. The house! He'd left David our home? The Victorian we'd painstakingly restored room by room, the garden I'd cultivated for 30 decades, the kitchen where I'd taught David how to bake his first apple pie? A cold numbness began to spread through my limbs. I turned to David. His face, which had been a mask of appropriate solemnity, underwent a subtle but profound transformation. The lines around his mouth softened. A gleam of pure, unadulterated triumph flashed in his eyes before he quickly suppressed it, replacing it with a look of somber gratitude. He gave my arm a squeeze that felt possessive rather than comforting. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered, his voice low. "I'll take care of everything. You'll always have a place with me." With me, not in your home. The shift in language was a tiny, sharp needle to my heart. And then the final blow landed. "And to my beloved wife, Elizabeth," Mr. Henderson continued, his eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a pity that made my stomach clench, "I leave the property and all its contents located at 17 Old Mill Road." Silence. Old Mill Road? I racked my brain. It was the old garage. A standalone two-car garage on a small, overgrown plot of land on the edge of town that had belonged to Arthur's father. We hadn't spoken of it in 30 years. I'd assumed it had long since been reclaimed by weeds and rot. A garage. After 45 years of marriage, after raising a child together, after building a life, My Arthur had left me a derelict garage. The rest of the reading was a blur. I remember the weight of David's hand on my back as he guided me from the office, the muffled sounds of traffic outside, the way the sunlight seemed too bright, too cheerful for the devastation I felt inside his sleek black sedan. "Try not to be upset, Mom," David said, breaking the heavy silence as we drove. Dad was pragmatic. He knew you'd be lost with the finances, the property taxes, all of it. This way, it's simpler. You don't have to worry about a thing. I stared out the window at the familiar streets rolling by. Why wouldn't he leave me the house, David? It was our home. Is our home, David corrected gently, but the correction felt like a rebuke. And it will be, you'll see. This is for the best. When we pulled into the circular driveway of the beautiful Victorian I loved more than any place on earth, David didn't cut the engine. He turned to me, his expression a practiced blend of regret and resolve. "Look, Mom," he began, and I knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, what was coming. "I think it's better if we make a clean break now. The design team I've hired to modernize the place starts first thing tomorrow. It'll be less painful for you if you're not watching them, well, dismantle the old." Dismantle? The word was a whisper. "David, what are you saying? This is my home. Where will I go?" He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but it passed quickly. "Aunt Clara would be happy to have you for a while. Or, there's always that place Dad left you." He gave a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Though what you're supposed to do with a crumbling old shed is beyond me. Open a quaint little antique shop at your age?" The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. This was my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose nightmares I had soothed. Now he looked at me and saw an inconvenience, a relic to be stored away. "I need time to process this, to find a place," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Time is a luxury I don't have," he said, his voice taking on the hard, impatient edge I'd heard him use on business calls. "This house is mine now. Dad made his wishes perfectly clear." Then he said it, the words that would echo in the hollows of my mind for the long, dark hours to come. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, all pretense of filial duty fell away, and I saw the man he had become. A stranger driven by ambition and a profound sense of entitlement. "Let's be realistic, Mother." He never called me Mother. It was always Mom. The formality, it was a weapon. "You're a kind, simple woman. What would you have done with the deed to a house like this? A stock portfolio? Dad knew you couldn't manage it. He knew you needed someone to handle the complicated things. He was protecting you." Kind, simple. Euphemisms for incapable, for obsolete. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The grief, the confusion, the betrayal, they were still there, but they were suddenly muted, buried under a layer of sheer survival instinct. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply nodded, opened the car door, and retrieved my single suitcase from the back seat. I walked to the front door one last time, not to go inside, but to take the rusty, skeleton-keyed padlock key Mr. Henderson had pressed into my hand after the reading. I turned my back on my home and walked away without a backward glance. So, that is how I came to spend the evening of my 68th birthday, curled up in the passenger seat of my decade-old Toyota Corolla, parked on a dirt track in front of a dilapidated, vine-strangled garage at 17 Old Mill Road. The tears came then, silent and hot, coursing down my cheeks as I clutched that cold, unfamiliar piece of metal in my fist. I felt more alone than I had ever had in my entire life. The world had shrunk to the confines of my car and the oppressive shadow of a building that symbolized my utter worthlessness. The next morning, I awoke stiff, cold, and aching in every joint. The dawn light did no favors to the garage. It was worse than I remembered. The white paint, if you could still call it that, was blistered and peeling like a sunburn. One of the two small windows was a spider web of cracks. Weeds grew tall against the corrugated metal door, and the padlock was a fist-sized lump of rust. It was the very picture of neglect, a perfect mirror for how I felt inside. With a hand that trembled not from the morning chill, but from a bottomless well of despair, I slid the key into the padlock. It was stubborn, resisting my turn. I jiggled it, putting my slight weight behind the motion, and with a sound like a death rattle, the lock mechanism gave way with a heavy clunk. I slid the lock out of the hasp and took a deep breath. Gripping the handle, I pulled. The door didn't budge. I pulled again, harder this time, my shoes slipping in the gravel. Nothing. It was swollen shut, fused to its frame by decades of rain, sun, and indifference. A fresh wave of hopelessness washed over me. Was I to be defeated by a door? Anger, hot and sudden, flared in my chest. It was a new feeling, cutting through the grief like a knife. I braced one foot against the doorframe, wrapped both hands around the handle, and pulled with every ounce of strength I possessed. With a groan of protest that seemed to shake the very foundations, the door gave way, sliding open a foot with a screech of metal on concrete. A puff of stale, dusty air escaped, carrying with it a scent that made me pause. It wasn't the damp, earthy smell of decay I expected. It was clean, dry, with a faint, almost imperceptible hint of lemon oil and rubber. Puzzled, I squeezed through the opening, my phone already in hand, its flashlight piercing the gloom, and I stopped dead. My breath hitched. This was wrong. The beam of light did not play over stacks of mildewed boxes or the carcasses of old lawn furniture. It swept across a floor of pristine, sealed concrete, so smooth it looked wet. The space was cavernous, much larger than it appeared from the outside, and utterly spotless. The air was still and cool, climate-controlled. And in the center of this vast, clean space, arranged with geometric precision, were three large amorphous shapes, each shrouded in a heavy gray canvas cover that looked custom-tailored. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my ears. What was this? Driven by a confusion that overrode everything else, I moved toward the closest shape. My footsteps echoed in the immense silence. I reached out a tentative hand, the canvas soft and cool beneath my fingertips. I found a seam, a tie, and with a gentle tug, the cover loosened. I took a corner and pulled. The cover slid away with a soft, whispering sound, pooling on the floor at my feet. And there it was. The beam of my flashlight illuminated a car, but it was like no car I had ever seen outside of a museum. A 1961 Jaguar E-Type Series 1 Roadster. Its body was a low-slung, impossibly elegant curve of British racing green, the color so deep and rich that it seemed to swallow the light. The chrome bumpers and wire wheels gleamed as if they'd been polished minutes ago. It was automotive sculpture, a piece of art frozen in time. I knew what it was. Of course I knew. A lifetime ago, before I was a wife, before I was a mother, I had been a different person. I'd worked part-time in a local garage, not just answering phones, but helping with tune-ups, learning about engines, falling in love with the sleek, powerful machines of a bygone era. It was a part of my life I'd packed away, a story I never told my son, who valued only new, expensive, and status-signifying things. "Arthur," I whispered, the name a prayer and a question in the profound silence. What have you done? My hands were steadier now, my movements sure. I moved to the next shrouded form and pulled its cover away. A 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, two-door hardtop. Turquoise and white, its iconic fins sharp enough to cut glass, its grille a grinning chrome masterpiece. A car straight out of a sock hop dream. The third cover concealed a car that made my knees go weak, a 1963 Aston Martin DB5, silver birch, the same car driven by a certain British secret agent. It was the most beautiful, the most menacing, the most utterly desirable thing I had ever laid eyes on. This was not a storage unit, this was a sanctuary, a secret museum curated with passion and an eye for perfection. And my Arthur, my quiet, reserved husband who had contented himself to drive a sensible family sedan for 20 years, was its creator. But why? Why here? Why keep it from me? My phone flashlight beam danced across the wall and caught on a stark white rectangle. An envelope, taped neatly beside a modern flat-panel light switch. My name was written in Arthur's unmistakable, elegant script. My throat tightened. With fingers that had begun to tremble again, I reached up and peeled the envelope from the wall. It was thick, heavy with pages. I took a deep, steadying breath and flipped the light switch. The transformation was breathtaking. Recessed into the high, finished ceiling, a series of LED panels flickered to life, flooding the entire space with a bright, shadowless, museum-quality light. I gasped, spinning slowly in place. The garage was a masterpiece of deception. The exterior was a carefully maintained ruin, but the interior was a state-of-the-art, climate-controlled vault. The walls were insulated and finished with smooth white epoxy. A complex-looking HVAC system hummed almost inaudibly in one corner. A professional-grade workbench ran along one wall, its surface bare except for a neatly arranged set of polished tools. There were cabinets, a sink, even a small modern fire suppression system. This was no afterthought. This was a project. A years-long, meticulously planned, and exorbitantly expensive project. I found a sleek metal stool tucked under the workbench and sank onto it, the envelope feeling like a lead weight in my hands. I took a moment just to breathe, to absorb the sheer scale of the secret I had stumbled into. Then, with deliberate care, I broke the seal and pulled out the pages. My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then my time has come, and you have found your way here, to this place, and to the truth. First, and most importantly, I need you to know how deeply, profoundly sorry I am for the confusion and the heartache my will has surely caused you. Every word of it was written with you in mind, with a love for you that has been the greatest privilege of my life. 7 years ago, when the doctor sat us down and gave us the news about my heart, I saw the fear in your eyes. But my fear was different. It was a cold, gripping terror at the thought of leaving you unprotected. I have watched our David, the boy we cherished, transform over the past decade. The ambition we encouraged has curdled into something harder, more acquisitive. The charm has become a tool for manipulation. I came to fear that if I left our assets to you outright, or even in a shared trust, he would slowly, systematically use his influence and your generous heart to gain control of everything. He would manage it for you. He would make you dependent. He would strip you of your voice and your autonomy. I have heard the way he speaks to you, my love, the subtle dismissals, the patronizing tone when you offer an opinion. I could not and would not let that be the story of your remaining years. So, I devised a plan, a test, if you will. David has been given what he covets most, the public symbol of success, the beautiful house, the visible wealth. It is a generous inheritance, but it is also a gilded cage. The maintenance on that old Victorian is astronomical. The property taxes are a milestone. He will soon discover that the prize he fought for is also a chain. But you, my brilliant, remarkable Elizabeth, you have been given the true legacy. These cars are not merely investments. They are my apologies for every time I saw David belittle you and remain silent. They are my thank you for every sacrifice you ever made for our family. They are my love made tangible. Do you remember the Jaguar you pointed to in a magazine on our honeymoon saying it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen? The Bel Air you said reminded you of your first date? Or the Aston Martin we saw in that movie when you squeezed my arm and said, "Now that's a car." I listened. I remembered every single word. This collection is currently valued at just over $15 million. I had to stop. The page blurred as tears welled in my eyes and spilled over, splashing onto the paper and smudging the ink. $15 million. The number was so vast it was meaningless. But the sentiment behind it, that was everything. All those years, I thought he was just nodding along, humoring my nostalgic ramblings. But he wasn't just listening. He was building. He was creating a monument to the woman he knew I was, the woman I had forgotten. But the cars, my love, are only the beginning. Beneath the Persian rug next to the workbench, the one that reminds me of the one in your grandmother's parlor, you will find a floor safe. The combination is the date of the day we met. September 18th, 1972. Inside, you will find the rest of your inheritance. There are deeds to a small seaside cottage in Rockport, Massachusetts. You wept when we left that town. Do you remember? It is fully furnished with a view of the ocean from every main room. There are bank accounts, brokerage statements, and bonds, all in your name alone, structured to provide you with a more than comfortable income for the rest of your life without the need for anyone's permission or assistance. You will also find the contact information for Mr. Alastair Finch, the most discreet and trustworthy classic car broker on the East Coast. He has been my partner in this endeavor and is expecting your call. I know this must be overwhelming. The secrecy was the hardest part. I hid this from you not out of a lack of trust, but from a surplus of caution. I feared that if David caught even a whiff of this, the pressure on you would be unbearable. I also wanted to give him a chance, Elizabeth, a final opportunity to prove himself the man we prayed he would become. If he has welcomed you into his home, if he has treated you with the love, respect, and generosity you deserve, then the contents of this letter are yours to share with him as you see fit. But if he has revealed the colder, more calculating nature I feared was taking root, then this is your armor, your fortress of solitude, your absolute and total freedom. I was never a simple woman to me, Elizabeth. You were the most complex, intelligent, and resilient person I have ever known. You put your own dreams in a box to build a family with me, and you simply forgot where you put the key. Consider this your key. All my love, now and forever, Arthur. I pressed the pages to my chest, sobs racking my body. They were not sobs of grief, not anymore. They were sobs of release, of vindication, of a love so profound and foresighted that it left me breathless. He had seen the real me, buried under layers of motherhood and wifely duty, and he had spent his final years ensuring she could breathe again. I found the rug, a beautiful, worn killum in shades of crimson and navy. I rolled it back, revealing a flush-mounted safe in the concrete floor. My hands were steady as I dialed the numbers. 091872. A soft, solid click. Inside, nestled in neat stacks and folders, was my new life. The deed to the cottage in Rockport brought fresh tears. The bank statements had so many zeros I had to count them twice, then a third time. There were stock certificates, property deeds for 2 small apartment buildings in a nearby city I never knew he owned, and a slim black USB drive labeled "For Elizabeth's Eyes Only." I wasn't destitute. I wasn't a burden. I was, by any measure, an independently wealthy woman. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. David was at that very moment, no doubt, presiding over the demolition of my former life, believing himself the sole victor, while I sat in what he derided as a crumbling old shed, the inheritor of a fortune that dwarfed his own. I spent the next hour exploring every inch of my new domain. Behind a cleverly concealed door that looked like part of the wall, I found a small, impeccably designed studio apartment. A kitchenette with a marble countertop, a bathroom with a rainfall shower, and a comfortable double bed made up with crisp white linens. A closet held a few changes of clothes in my size, tags still attached. Arthur had thought of everything. He knew I might need a sanctuary, a place to gather my strength. As evening drew in, I made myself a cup of tea from the provisions in the mini kitchen and sat at the small table, the documents spread out before me. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Alistair Finch. It rang only once. "Finch," a crisp British voice answered. "Mr. Finch," I began, my voice slightly hoarse. "This is Elizabeth Bell, Arthur's wife." There was a brief respectful pause. "Mrs. Bell, I have been expecting your call. Please, accept my deepest condolences. Arthur was not just a client, he was a dear friend. He spoke of you constantly." We spoke for nearly an hour. He confirmed the valuations, the provenance of each car, the security protocols for the facility. He explained how Arthur had been methodical, passionate, and utterly single-minded in this pursuit. He said it was his life's second greatest work, after you, of course, Alistair told me, his voice warm. He called it Project Phoenix. He said it was about making sure you could rise from the ashes of his passing, not diminished, but reborn. The next few days passed in a surreal blur. I met with the lawyers and financial advisors whose names were in the portfolio, all formidable, brilliant women who Arthur had personally vetted. Patricia Winters, a steely-eyed estate attorney, walked me through the unassailable legal structures Arthur had created. Eleanor Vance, a financial planner, laid out a budget that would allow me to live in luxury for 3 lifetimes without ever touching the principal. I was no longer Elizabeth, the grieving widow. I was Elizabeth Bell, a woman of substance and means. And then my phone rang. It was David. "Mom, where are you?" His voice was tight, frayed with impatience. "I've been dealing with the contractors and the landscapers alone. I need you to come get the rest of your things. I'm turning the sunroom into a home gym and they need it cleared out." My sunroom. The room with the morning light where I'd spent countless hours with my books and my plants. "I'll be there tomorrow, David," I said, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor he'd come to expect. "Fine, and Mom, don't bring a lot of boxes. I don't want clutter. Just be quick about it." The old me would have apologized for the inconvenience. The new me simply ended the call. The following morning, I stood before the 3 cars. The Jaguar was beautiful, the Chevy was iconic, but the Aston Martin called to me. It was audacious, it was powerful, it was a statement. I pressed the start button. The engine didn't just start, it awoke. A low, guttural roar erupted from the exhaust, a sound of pure, untamed power that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my bones. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time since Arthur's diagnosis. I slid into the leather driver's seat, the cockpit enveloping me like a glove. I familiarized myself with the classic toggle switch controls, then took a deep breath and eased the car out of the garage and into the daylight. Driving that car was a religious experience. The way it handled, the responsive steering, the surge of power when I touched the accelerator, it was like nothing I had ever felt. I drove to my old neighborhood, the thunderous purr of the engine turning heads on the quiet, tree-lined streets. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Victorian, the Aston Martin's low-slung silhouette looking like an alien spacecraft next to David's sensible SUV. He was on the porch, deep in conversation with a man holding a blueprint. He turned at the sound of the engine, his face a comical mask of confusion as he watched this rare, million-dollar machine glide to a stop. His jaw went slack when I opened the door and stepped out. "Mom?" he sputtered, his eyes wide, darting from me to the car and back again. What is this? Whose car is that?" "It's mine, David," I said, my voice even. I smoothed down the simple but beautifully cut navy blue dress I'd taken from the closet in the garage apartment. "It seems your father's taste in garages was more discerning than you gave him credit for." I walked past him through the front door. The house was a war zone. The beautiful original moldings were being ripped from the walls. The hardwood floors I'd refinished by hand were covered in drop cloths and dust. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and plaster. It was the destruction of my past, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like someone else's problem. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. My personal items had been haphazardly thrown into a few cardboard boxes. I began sorting through them, pulling out what I truly wanted. My mother's pearl necklace, the leather-bound journals I'd kept since I was a girl, the small ceramic dish Arthur had made for me in a pottery class. David followed me, his confusion rapidly morphing into a hot, simmering anger. "What do you mean it's yours?" he demanded, his voice rising. I turned and looked at him, my gaze steady. I saw the ghost of the little boy in his face, but it was overshadowed by the man's avarice and entitlement. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for him. "Your father left me a few vintage automobiles, David. It appears they are quite collectible." "Collectible?" he repeated, the word dripping with avarice. "How collectible? What are they worth?" "They are worth enough," I said, my tone leaving no room for further inquiry. I turned back to the box. He stepped forward, grabbing my wrist, not painfully, but with a firmness that was meant to intimidate. "Mom, stop. We need to talk about this right now. If Dad was hiding assets of that magnitude, the will is contestable. We need to get our own lawyers together and challenge this." I looked down on his hand on my wrist, then slowly, deliberately, pulled my arm from his grasp. The movement was calm, but the message was one of pure, unassailable authority. "I have lawyers, David, very good ones, and the will is ironclad. Your father knew exactly what he was doing." "He played me," David shouted, his face flushing a blotchy red. "He made me look like a fool. He gave me this money pit." He gestured wildly at the crumbling walls around us. "Well, he hid a fortune from me, from his only son." "No," I said, my voice quiet but resonating in the torn-up room. "You gave him exactly what you demonstrated you wanted, the surface, the appearance of wealth, and he gave me what I truly needed, my independence. He also gave you a choice, David, a chance to show grace, to show compassion, to be a son to your mother in her time of greatest need. And you made your choice." The truth of it landed on him with the weight of an anvil. He physically recoiled, taking a stumbling step backward. You can't be serious," he stammered, his bravado crumbling into bewildered panic. "You're not actually going to keep it all for yourself? What about me? What about my future?" I closed the lid on the last box and picked it up. It was light, containing only what truly mattered. "What you do with your inheritance is your responsibility, David. What I do with mine is mine. and I will not be using it to subsidize a lifestyle or to clean up financial messes born of poor judgment. I met his gaze, my eyes clear and certain. You called me a simple woman who couldn't handle a real inheritance. You were wrong. Your father knew the truth, and now, at long last, so do I. I walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and out the front door of what used to be my home. I placed the box carefully on the passenger seat of the Aston Martin. I didn't look back at David, who stood frozen in the doorway, his worldview shattered. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Driving away from that house for the last time, the roar of the Aston Martin's engine wasn't just a sound. It was a declaration, a line being drawn in the sand of my life. The wind whipping through the open window felt like it was scouring away 45 years of quiet compromise, of making myself smaller to make others comfortable. For the first time, the weight in my chest wasn't grief. It was potential. I didn't go back to the garage immediately. I drove. I drove for hours along country roads I hadn't traveled in years, the powerful car responding to my slightest touch as if it were an extension of my own will. With every mile, the woman Arthur believed in, the one who could rebuild a carburetor and wasn't afraid of getting grease under her nails, stretched and woke up. By the time I returned to my secret sanctuary, my plan was already forming. The following week was a whirlwind of purposeful activity. My first stop was Rockport. The cottage was exactly as Arthur had described, a charming, shingled Cape Cod nestled right against the granite coastline with a wall of windows facing the Atlantic. The key was under the flower pot, just as he'd written in a separate note. Stepping inside was like stepping into a hug. The furniture was a mix of comfortable, worn-in pieces and beautiful antiques I recognized from our early married years, pieces I thought we'd sold. He hadn't sold them. He'd been building this for me, piece by piece, memory by memory. On the mantel was a single photograph in a silver frame, the two of us on our 5th anniversary, laughing, so young and full of hope. I sank onto the sofa and wept. But this time, they were cleansing tears. I decided then and there, this would be my home. The garage would remain my fortress, my workshop, my secret. But this was where I would live. I moved in quietly. I used the funds Arthur had set aside to hire a local handyman for a few small repairs and a cheerful woman named Maria who came twice a week to help clean. I didn't need the help, but I valued the company. I started a garden, planting roses and lavender, my hands back in the earth where they belonged. The neighbors, a retired couple named Bill and Jean, welcomed me with a blueberry pie and no questions, for which I was profoundly grateful. Meanwhile, with Alistair Finch's expert guidance, I made decisions about the cars. I sold the Chevrolet Bel Air. It was beautiful, but it held a specific, youthful nostalgia that felt like a closed chapter. The sale price was staggering, enough to secure my grandchildren's college educations 10 times over. The money was placed in a trust, its existence known only to me and my attorney. The Jaguar I decided to keep. It was Arthur's first purchase for the collection, the car that had started it all. It felt right to hold on to it. But the Aston Martin. The Aston Martin was mine. I had it professionally inspected and serviced, and then I drove it. Not to show off, but for the pure, unadulterated joy of it. I became a familiar sight on the coastal roads. A silver-haired woman in a silver bullet of a car, a small, secret smile on my face. I enrolled in a modern automotive technology course at the local community college under my maiden name, Elizabeth Shaw. The looks from the young men in the class were initially pitying or dismissive. What's Grandma doing here? I saw the questions in their eyes. But when I aced the first diagnostic test and correctly identified a faulty oxygen sensor by sound alone during a lab, the pity turned to respect. I wasn't there to prove anything to them. I was there to reclaim a part of myself I'd locked away. I made a friend too, a young woman named Chloe, who was the only other female in the class. We became an unlikely duo, me with my lifetime of experience, and her with her fresh, tech-savvy knowledge. Back in my old life, David was learning the hard way about the gilded cage Arthur had left him in. He called me, his tone shifting from demanding to wheedling. "Mom, you wouldn't believe the plumbing issues in this place. The entire system needs to be replaced. It's a nightmare. And the property tax bill just came." I listened patiently. "That sounds very difficult, David. Have you spoken to a financial advisor?" He was silent for a moment, thrown by my neutral response. "Well, no, but I was hoping, since you came into some money, a short-term loan?" "I'm not a bank, David. You're a smart, capable man. I'm sure you'll find a solution." The call ended with him hanging up in a huff. It was hard. Every maternal instinct I had screamed to help my child, but I knew, with a certainty Arthur had gifted me, that bailing him out would only reinforce the very behaviors that had led us here. This was his journey, his test, and he had to face it. Weeks turned into months. The New England autumn painted the coastline in fiery hues. My life in Rockport took on a deep, satisfying rhythm. My class ended, and I earned my certification, a silly piece of paper that nonetheless filled me with pride. Chloe and I started a small, informal weekend workshop for local teenage girls, teaching them basic car maintenance, how to change a tire, check the oil, jumpstart a battery. We called it Girls in Gears. The joy of watching their confidence bloom was a different kind of wealth, one no bank could ever hold. Then, one crisp October afternoon, I saw him. I was working in my garden, pruning back the spent blooms of my hydrangeas, when a familiar car pulled up. David got out. He looked different, thinner, older. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary uncertainty. He was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, not one of his expensive suits. He stood by the gate for a moment, just looking at the cottage, at me kneeling in the dirt. "Mom?" he said, his voice quiet. "David," I replied, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "This is a surprise?" I had to see it. The cottage," he gestured weakly. "Aunt Clara told me you'd moved to the coast. It took me a while to find the exact address." I didn't ask how he'd gotten it from Clara. I simply opened the gate. "Would you like to come in? I was just about to make some tea." He nodded, following me inside. He was silent as he took in the cozy living room, the bookshelves, the photograph of Arthur and me on the mantel. He saw the Jaguar key fobs sitting on the side table next to my reading glasses. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same sea view before us that had captivated me from the first day. For a long time, the only sound was the kettle coming to a boil. "I've lost the house," he said finally, staring into his mug. "The renovation costs, the taxes, I couldn't keep up. I've moved into an apartment." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry for his pain, even if it was self-inflicted. "I've started seeing someone," he continued, still not looking at me. "A therapist. She's helping me see some patterns." He took a shaky breath. "The way I treated you, Mom, after Dad died. It was unforgivable. I remained silent, letting him find the words. I was so angry at Dad. I felt cheated. But I was really angry at myself. I'd built this image of success, this perfect life, and it was all so fragile. When he left me the house, I thought it was his endorsement, his final stamp of approval. But it was a test, wasn't it? And I failed. I failed so completely. The raw honesty in his voice was new. This wasn't the polished businessman or the petulant son. This was a man humbled by his own reflection. Your father, I said carefully, didn't want you to fail, David. He wanted you to succeed at being a good man. He left you the tools for a comfortable life. He left me the tools for my freedom. They were just different sets of tools. He finally looked at me, his eyes glistening. The cars, the money, you're not going to give me any of it, are you? I held his gaze. No, David, I'm not. That's not its purpose. That money is my security, my independence. It's what allows me to sit here with you now, not as your dependent, but as your mother, an equal. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. It was a bitter pill, but he swallowed it. What is its purpose, then? I smiled then, a genuine, warm smile. Come with me. I led him out to the detached garage behind the cottage. A simple, ordinary garage where I kept my everyday car and my gardening tools. I opened the door. Inside, next to my sensible sedan, was the Jaguar, and next to it, on a rolling tool chest, were the plans Chloe and I had drawn up for expanding Girls and Gears into a proper nonprofit. This, I said, gesturing to the plans, is part of its purpose. To help young women find their own confidence, to know they can be strong and capable, and not defined by anyone's limitations but their own. Another part is right here. I handed him a small velvet box. Frowning, he opened it. Inside was a key. Not a car key, a simple brass key. It's a key to this cottage, David. Your father's money bought this house, but it didn't buy the home that's inside it. That I built. And this will always be your home whenever you want to visit, not as a guest, but as my son, on one condition. What's that? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. That you leave the man who called me a simple woman at the door. He's not welcome here. I want to get to know the man you are becoming. He broke then. The tears he'd been holding back fell freely. He didn't try to hide them. He just stood there in my ordinary garage, clutching that simple key, and cried for all that he'd lost and for the fragile, hopeful chance at something new. He visits now, every few weeks. We talk. Really talk. He helps me in the garden, and I help him untangle the mess he made of his finances. Not with a checkbook, but with advice and tough love. He's dating a nice woman, a teacher, who isn't impressed by his former bluster. The road to rebuilding trust is long, and there are stumbles, but we are on it together. For the first time in a long time, we are building a relationship based on truth, not on roles we felt we had to play. And Arthur? He's here, in the whisper of the ocean outside my window, in the purr of the Jaguar's engine, in the determined faces of the girls in my workshop. His love wasn't just a memory, it was a blueprint for my future. He didn't just leave me an inheritance, he gave me back myself. The world may still see a sweet old lady puttering in her garden, but I am so much more. I'm a mechanic, a teacher, a philanthropist, a survivor. I am Elizabeth. And if you are watching this, feeling boxed in by someone else's expectations or your own self-doubt, I want you to know this. Your worth is not determined by your age, your circumstances, or the opinions of others. It is the quiet, unshakable truth at your very core. Sometimes it takes a key, a literal one or a metaphorical one, to unlock it. It might be hidden in a forgotten garage, a new skill, a kindness, or simply the decision to say no more. Your story isn't over. Your most powerful chapter might be waiting to be written. If my story has touched you, I would be so grateful if you join our community here. Subscribe to this channel. Share your own stories of finding your strength in the comments below. Let's inspire each other. And please, share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own incredible value. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. Remember, no matter your age, it is never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Be brave. Turn the key.